Hey, everybody. I'm Rebecca Lynch from Thieving at Our Farm,
And I'm Leo with Southern Biophiliac Urban Farm,
and we are two Chix Coturnix bringing you the scoop
not the poop.
on Coturnix quail. So, spring is right around the corner, and everybody is getting excited about incubating their quail. And I know there are a lot of newbies out there, and maybe some people that aren't so newbie but want to learn some tips and tricks or something new. So today we thought we'd get together and do a little presentation on incubating quail for dummies.
Hatch Day is my favorite
Hatch day is the best day. I don't care how many chicks you hatch out, it is always the best day.
every single time.
Yep. So, before we dive into this, it's important to know that incubating quail is a science. Okay. We have to get kind of everything right to produce a live creature in an artificial environment. Okay. We're trying to mimic Mother Nature, who knows her stuff. And so we kind of have to get everything right.
So, incubating eggs is just like baking in the kitchen, it's science. So, you have to get all of the ingredients right to get your quail to hatch. If you have too little of something or too much of something, it can be a disaster.
So, what are the ingredients of baking quail, of, of incubating little quail chicks? We need eggs, obviously, time, temperature, humidity, handling, and each is a super important part of the science of hatching.
Eggs. You guys, we cannot have chicks without eggs. But the important thing here is you also can't have chicks without eggs that are not fresh, clean, from healthy birds, from properly fed birds, or that have been handled appropriately.
So, let's dive a little deeper into this. Leah, what do you consider fresh?
For fresh eggs, say if I'm shipping out eggs, I won't have them more than 3 days old. And then anything that goes in the incubator can be up to, but not beyond 10 days.
Okay. What about clean? Why did we put that on there?
Well, say there's bird poop on the eggs or an egg broke and there's yolk on one of the eggs. We don't want to put dirty eggs in an incubator due to the fact that they could be harboring bacteria and affect the other eggs.
What about from healthy birds?
It's important to get eggs from healthy birds due to the fact that some illnesses can actually travel through the egg. Also, you want to make sure that the eggs and embryos are going to be healthy when they hatch.
Okay. What about properly fed birds? Why is that important?
Nutrition is very, very important to make sure that you have strong, healthy chicks that hatch.
And what's this about having been handled properly?
Any eggs that could have been inappropriately handled could have been damaged on the inside. You may not even see it on the outside, but inside the eggs, if they're damaged, they may not hatch.
Speaking of handling, so eggs are delicate and they must be handled really carefully.
So this comes down to many different factors, including storage, shipping and transporting, candling, turning or not turning, using an automatic turner versus a hand turner, or even letting kids help.
So let's start with storage. Why is storage important?
If they're not properly stored, especially when it comes to temperatures, the eggs can actually get damaged, say if they get too hot or too cold.
Okay. And before we talked about the length of time before shipping the eggs, why is that important?
Eggs lose viability after 10 days, and then they keep dropping in viability past that. So if you have an egg that is past 10 days, every day that goes beyond that, it's less likely to hatch.
So, in other words, you want to make sure that there's time for shipping time and possible delays, and then handling time once they get to the person who's going to hatch them out, right?
Definitely, because if you received shipped eggs, you want to make sure that you've given them at least 24 hours to rest before putting them in the incubator.
Let's talk about resting some more. What does that look like?
Resting is important for eggs that have been shipped due to the fact that eggs get rattled in transport, and there's little air sacs inside of the eggs. And sometimes those can get knocked loose in transport when they get knocked around. So if you let the eggs sit for 24 hours, that helps that air sac to settle back in place.
And should they sit in a certain position?
They should be pointy end down.
Okay. Yep. That allows that air cell to settle right back in the blunt end of the egg where it should be. So, a little bit more about shipping and transporting. It's important for people to understand that when eggs are shipped, they're bounced around, they're shook, they're submitted to x-rays, they can be dropped, they can sit in odd positions. There's all kinds of things that can happen to them, and all of these things can affect your hatch rate. So let's talk about candling. Leah, can you tell us what candling is and why we may or may not want to do it?
So, candling is when you shine a light into the egg to see if it's developing or not. Generally, you would do it in a dark room, and there's multiple ways to candle. Some people do flashlights, and they make special little candling devices. Um, Candling has pros and cons, and I think more cons than anything else. Um, One reason being that quail eggs can actually be difficult to see into due to all the speckling on the eggs. And if you happen to candle often, you're subjecting that egg into a lot of temperature and humidity swings, taking it in and out of the incubator, which could cause less viability for that egg.
Absolutely. Not to mention the chance of dropping the egg. I know I've done that.
Yeah, me too,
I,
many, many times.
I no longer candle at all, other than, sometimes right when I received shipped eggs, I may candle to look for cracks from shipping. If I do, I'm super careful about it, not to move them around any more than I have to, simply because, they've already been jostled around quite a bit. And then I let them rest. A lot of people will let them rest and then candle before they put them in the incubator. And now they've sloshed everything around again. So I find it's really important to, if you're going to candle, be careful about when you do it. What about turning? Turning or not turning? What's the issue with that?
So if you think about nature, mother birds will naturally turn their eggs. So it's something that helps that embryo not to stick to one side of the egg, and helps them actually get into position when it's time to hatch.
Yeah, and studies have actually shown that not turning can produce some pretty nasty defects. I myself have accidentally not turned on my turner before and had a really low hatch rate and a number of birds with defects before. So it's always good to turn. But what about automatic turners versus hand turning? What are your thoughts on that?
So I personally definitely prefer the automatic turners, just because you don't have to worry about turning the eggs. It's going to do it for you. And as long as your machine is actually set for quail eggs, because if it's set, say, for chicken or a larger bird egg, it can actually overturn that egg.
Mhm.
Hand turning generally isn't very beneficial, due to the fact you're going to have temperature and humidity swings every time you open that incubator. And eggs are supposed to be turned at least 3 times per day.
Absolutely. What about letting kids help? This is a family affair. Why wouldn't we want to let kids help?
They always do, and it's always with good intentions. But kids, they're going to want to turn those eggs over and look them over and possibly drop them. So it's generally just best that you handle the eggs and talk to them and teach them about the eggs versus actually letting them hold the eggs.
Very good points. Let's talk about time. One of the big things that we talked about was the age of eggs before incubation. So we definitely want to make sure that we have fresh eggs that we're going to incubate, or fresh eggs that we are going to send out if we happen to be a breeder and are sending out eggs for someone else to incubate. But what about incubation time? How long do these eggs need to incubate?
They're generally going to hatch around day 17, but you do want to give or take a day on that. But if you have everything set correctly, it should be right around day 17.
Okay. And what would be your lockdown timing? When would you lock down?
2 weeks from setting the eggs in the incubator.
Okay. And then how long before you start removing the chicks from the incubator?
At the very minimum, 24 hours.
And why would you want to wait? Can't you just take the chicks out right after they hatch?
What happens is when you open that incubator, you cause the humidity to drop, and any other eggs that could be attempting to hatch, you could actually cause that inner membrane to shrink wrap around the chick that's inside.
Yeah, that would make it really hard for that chick to hatch. So really cool fun fact, a newly laid egg can hatch a full day early, and a 10-day-old egg or older can hatch up to a full day late. So if you have eggs that are all different ages when you stick them in your incubator, you can have kind of a staggered hatch.
I think that's pretty cool.
It's really cool. All right, so we briefly mentioned lockdown in the previous slide, but let's talk about that a little bit more, because lockdown may not be a word that a newbie would know. So what is a lockdown?
So lockdown is when you are getting those eggs off the turners and you are setting them in preparation for them to hatch. And after you get them all set, you do not want to open the incubator.
So what would you do to get them set? Or is there anything special that you should lay down to help them hatch?
It's great to make sure that they have a good gripping surface. So what we personally use are like the drawer shelf liners in our baskets. And that just gives the chicks something good and grippy to grab onto when they get those little feet out.
And what can happen if you don't use that?
So if your incubator has a slippery surface, the chicks are, since they're fresh hatched and they're still trying to get their footing, they won't be able to get their footing. It's kind of like if you were thrown onto the ice without the proper footwear. You're going to be slipping and sliding, and that can actually create problems where they will not properly have alignment in the legs.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate to see little chicks with splay leg with their legs out to their side like Bambi on ice. Temperature. So temperature of eggs before incubation. We kind of briefly talked about storage and shipping. What is optimal?
So it's generally about 55 degrees, but usually room temperature does well. You don't want eggs that get too hot or too cold.
And what about the temperature of eggs during incubation? What do you set your incubator at?
So generally it's 99.5 degrees. I
And
usually set mine at 99.8.
Awesome. And consistency is super important. This is the biggest thing. Too little or too much temperature can have a huge impact on your hatch rate. So one of the biggest things that we see in groups, people post pictures of chicks that hatch too early. A lot of times their yolk is not yet fully absorbed, and that it's kind of like they're not quite done. So as in with the cookies in our baking picture, if your temperature is too high, it can cause the chicks to hatch before they're ready. So if you're seeing that problem, you want to look at your temperature.
Do we get to have cookies after this?
I would definitely like some cookies. Make sure that they're done.
Yes.
Humidity. What's important about humidity?
Humidity is really important. So it's just like with baking, you don't want to add too much moisture. So too little, the ingredients just won't come together and won't bake out right. So with humidity, it's especially important to make sure that it doesn't get too high. We talked earlier about that air sac with shipping getting shaken around. Well, that little air sac's really important. And what happens during development is that air sac will actually enlarge, and so that the chick has plenty of air to breathe before it ventures its the rest of the way out into the world. Well, if the humidity is too high, that air cell can't properly form. So then the chick won't have enough air to make it out of the egg. Humidity is also super important at lockdown because you do want to increase it some. That helps that inner membrane to soften so that the chick can exit.
What happens if there's too much humidity during lockdown?
Too much humidity can actually cause the inner membrane to get sticky, and the chick can actually drown or get stuck and never make it out.
That would be unfortunate. So let's talk a little bit about incubators. There's so many incubators out there.
And so many
There's
discussions.
Oh, I know. I think that we're gonna have to do an entire episode just on incubators.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to talk about expectations with incubators and kind of entry level incubators versus cabinet incubators and when it's time to spend a little bit more money and why that might be a good investment, as well as some problem areas with incubators. So, Leah, is there a topic that you want to dive into first?
Um, well, I have a preference for the cabinet incubators. I've done many of the entry level ones. Um, I had a lot of trouble with the entry level incubators. I had tried a few of the tabletops, and we ended up with one of them. It just never held heat. Luckily, we had a secondary thermometer in there so that I could adjust the temperature, but what it said on the screen wasn't actually what was going on inside. Um, and the second one I had was notorious for the automatic turner to quit working and for having hot and cold spots inside the incubator.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I started out with just one of those styrofoam incubators from Tractor Supply. And it actually worked pretty good for a while. I mean, pretty good if you didn't have super high expectations. But as a newbie quail hatcher and chicken hatcher, I was happy with what I was doing. And that was until one day when I started adding water for lockdown to raise the humidity. The thermostat decided it couldn't handle that extra humidity and decided to shoot the temperature up to like 106. So unfortunately, it also was a batch of really expensive eggs. It was like, oh, yay, I finally been doing great with incubating. And now I'm going to buy some really expensive eggs. And nope, fried them. So from there, I thought, well, okay, styrofoam, maybe it's not the best. And I upgraded to a plastic incubator from Amazon. And
Gotta love the Amazon incubators.
yes, I went through several of those, each time thinking I was doing great. I was like, woohoo, because I had no idea that cabinet incubators were a thing. So I was trying something new and the reviews looked good. And one of them was like a multi-layer incubator. And I was like, man, look at all these eggs I can incubate. And then I found out that each layer was like a 2-degree difference. Some were hatching and some weren't. I had another incubator that the readouts told me it was the correct temperature, but the eggs were just about smoking. It was so hot inside. Yeah, if it could happen, I've seen it happen because I tried all of those little incubators until I learned about captain incubators and was at a point where it was worth for me to make that investment. Because, frankly, sometimes those little, tabletop incubators off of Amazon or Tractor Supply are good enough for people that just, want to have that experience for their kids or whatever. But if you're wanting to actually make money off of raising quail, or have some sort of business, a cabinet incubator might be a good investment. So let's talk about secondary thermometers. You mentioned that briefly. What is a secondary thermometer and why do we need it?
So the secondary thermometers are super beneficial, just to make sure that the readout that your incubator is giving you is actually correct. They're also good if you're not sure if you have hot and cold spots inside, that you can actually move them around to make sure that the temperature is correct everywhere.
Yeah, and those hot and cold spots, if you find your eggs are hatching staggered, if you have a few hatch one day and a few more hatch another day, and 3 days later you're having more, you're going to want to check that incubator for hot and cold spots because you might have some eggs that are getting kind of chilled and taking longer to hatch. It's also important to mention that not all thermometers are equal. So when you're purchasing a thermometer, you want to look and see if they have the specs on the thermometer available because some of them can have quite a range of accuracy, like literally up to 5 degrees difference, plus or minus. So you could be like 10 degrees off. And the humidity can also be off by quite a bit. So you want to shop around and make sure that you get a secondary thermometer, hygrometer that is actually accurate, or else it's not any more helpful than those faulty readouts on your incubator. Leah, do you have a preferred secondary thermometer brand that you like to use?
I actually like the ThermoPro.
Same. I use ThermPro as well. So we have test run on here. What are your thoughts on doing like a test
I think
run?
that's my favorite word when it comes to incubators.
And why is that?
Because everybody, I'm like, make sure you've got your incubator running at least 24 hours prior to putting those eggs in. It's the
Absolutely.
worst thing to get your eggs and then you plug your incubator in and something's not working right.
And we all know about technology not working. How many times have we like been ready to do a show and we go to log in and something's not working?
Yep, my camera today.
So it's the same with your incubators. You want to make sure that before those eggs arrive, since those eggs are kind of have a time clock on them, that you only have a certain amount of time before those eggs start losing viability. You want to make sure that everything is up and running and properly working, and you know how to change the settings on your incubator before you start incubating those eggs. I also say it's not a bad idea to do a test run on some eggs that you don't really care about to make sure that your incubator is running properly and you know how to work it. Don't set out and buy like super expensive eggs that you're so excited about and try them in a new incubator because you may be disappointed.
Just like you with your styrofoam one.
Yes, I was so excited. At the time, those were the most expensive eggs I'd ever purchased, and it just broke my heart.
I bet.
Thank you all for watching. And as always, be sure to share, like, and subscribe to support our channel.
And thanks, guys, for tuning in tonight. We've got a coupon code ready for you that's good on both of our websites, and that is Hatch 10.
Have a great night.